if you had a magic wand,
Mhm.
what one skill would you want every member of medical affairs teams to master immediately, and why?
I would say impactful engagement.
Tell me more about that. What do you mean by
So
that?
an engagement is an engagement. Right now, you and I are engaging in a conversation. Is the conversation that we are having right now, is that going to have a positive impact on you? Is it going to have a positive impact on me?
In this episode, we will dive deep into the evolving landscape of medical affairs within this very complex healthcare system. We will have a very interesting guest, Lamia Kalfane, who will be discussing with us the critical skills you need to have to thrive. Welcome to SkillUp Lab. For us, you are a very special guest, not only because we know each other, but because you are the first guest. And I'm pretty sure we will not forget, right? So that's something that it's very special. Lamia Kalfane, it's a clinical pharmacist with broad experience in pharmaceutical industry as a medical affairs leader. For me, it's an honor to have you today. Thank you for accepting our invitation.
Well, thank you for thinking of me, and I am humbled to be your first guest. As medical affairs now becomes a lot more of a strategic partner than a support function, I think leaders in organizations have to invest in medical affairs. And that means I have been in many different industries where there's always a commercial excellence team, but there is very rarely a medical excellence team that is there to do anything beyond collecting metrics, right? Where is the capability building? If this function is going to be strategic, it needs to have the support.
Yeah, absolutely. So that was the aha moment for us. So, could you share your insights on how the role of medical affairs has evolved over the last 10, 15 years? And
So
what external changes in the healthcare system and in pharma have driven the change?
that's a very good question. The role of medical affairs has changed. Actually, the changes mirror what's happening in our healthcare systems. That means that the healthcare systems are a lot more constrained, budget constrained, resource constrained, and decision makers more and more increasingly look for data-driven decisions. They look for outcomes-based decisions, and therefore the data that medical affairs sort of holds in the palm of their hand is critical to advance things. And so as the healthcare system evolves, so do we have to evolve. We now have to engage with payers. We have to understand our market access in different countries. In Canada, for example, it's an HTA market. Therefore, we need to understand the HTA landscape. What that doesn't just mean you understand INES and CADIS, but you have to understand what they value. And so, do you have critical data gaps in your sponsored trials that CADIS and INES or any HTA will be looking for? In that case, it's incumbent on the medical affairs professional to put their hand up and say, we have a data gap here. How can we fill that data gap? Is it through de novo real world evidence generation? Is it through our PSPs or our expanded access programs where we can collect data that will be sufficient for what the HTAs require? So it's really understanding the landscape that we're in so that we can partner with the system, because at the end of the day, you and I think both share the same philosophy that the pharmaceutical industry isn't outside looking into the healthcare system. We are part of the healthcare ecosystem. That's where innovation comes from.
Yeah, absolutely. How do you navigate this challenge, right? Because you can see that everything is changing in everything is changing, but you're not necessarily being internally supported.
So I think it has to do with having a growth mindset. I myself, had the sort of onboarding you refer to, which is here are the preclinical data, here are the clinical data. This is our medical education plan. This is our medical affairs plan. Now you go out and you execute. And here are the the HCPs you should target. Here are the internal stakeholders you should meet with. But then it's just go and execute. And for me, I suppose because I've always had an entrepreneurial spirit, it didn't bother me to go and find information on my own. I used my HCPs as my teachers. They know the disease area the best. And so that's who taught me. And then I would just ask questions. For example, if I met with a provincial drug or pharmacy leader, what is it that matters to you? Well, what matters to them is predictability for their budget. Therefore, you provide them with a pipeline, with the anticipated launch times, with the anticipated, budget impact analysis. So you just have to meet your customers, internal and external, where they are, and find that win-win-win sweet spot, if you will.
I love what I'm hearing, but I want to challenge a little bit on one of the perspectives, which is you have an entrepreneurial mindset, but not necessarily every who's working within pharma medical affairs has this entrepreneurial mindset. I would assume that for some, navigating through this change can be somehow, kind of like an interesting challenge to take. But for some might be very painful, right? So
absolutely. So I think the first step is in how we provide even role descriptions. A medical affairs professional is not necessarily anyone who has a PhD, a PharmD, an MD. Those are qualifications, but they don't make you a medical affairs professional. So I think the organizations have to really describe what it is that they're looking for in the role description and in job postings. And when we interview, it doesn't matter if somebody is able to read a paper and then give us a presentation on it. We have to ask the right questions to make sure that that individual that we're interviewing is actually going to have that, number one, has the mindset we need and is going to be able to strive in the healthcare environment that we're in now, but also as we foresee changes.
I think the scientific component, the way of you guys really approaching science, it's hard to learn, right? That's why the basic profile pharmaceutical companies are looking for physicians or any person that is related to life sciences in general, right? Because it will be easier to teach them another capabilities. But I'm not sure that pharma companies are realizing that learning needs to happen inside.
Absolutely. So I think absolutely you do need a certain level of scientific background if you really want to establish yourself as a peer to the HCPs, because it's supposed to be a peer-to-peer relationship. So you do have to have that scientific know-how. But I think, Katza, if half of the people were as self-aware as you described, knowing they don't have maybe full strategic thinking or financial planning or cross-functional vision of the entire organization, that in itself, that self-awareness of knowing where your gaps are is huge, because then you can actually put that forward and own your development plan.
Yeah, what you're saying, it's so true. Because the challenge on the other side, and I think it's kind of naive thinking, well, let's try to find out there the perfect medical affairs profile. I don't think you're going to find it everywhere, but it's something that you build with time, sorry. And that's perfectly fine. So let's go back to, how was your onboarding when you started in medical affairs? Can you share a little bit? How was it? Was it painful? Was it easy?
Onboarding actually was quite painless, I have to say. And I think it was painless because my manager, I have seen, in some organizations where it's exactly that. You get the papers, you read through them, you have your SOPs that make absolutely no sense if you've never been in pharma. You're drowned in that for the first month or 2 months without even seeing anyone, especially since COVID and since now we're all doing hybrid work. And so it can be quite isolating. And how do you know, or how do you feel part of something when you're isolated? It's very difficult. And then it's very difficult to get that momentum that you can get as a group versus on your own.
did you have any moment, right? A specific moment or even a story that you'd like to tell us when you realized or your team realized that certain skills were not there?
I remember my team always telling me, but we have shared the data and the HCPs do seem impressed with the data. And my question was always, but then why aren't we seeing their practice change? And really, it was about the team maybe not fully engaging as they should with the HCPs. You can't just go in there with your agenda and say, my agenda is to share this data with you. Fine, the data is good and they want you out of their office. That's the easiest way to get somebody out of the office, is to agree with the data. What I think, not just MSLs, but also same applies to our commercial colleagues, we have to understand what drives that HCP. What is that HCP's pain point? Can the data that you have release that pain point? If they were to change their practice, what are the trade-offs? And so it's really about knowing your customer, number one, and trying to understand how, because change for any of us, right, is difficult. And so if you're going to ask an HCP to change their clinical practice, there has to be a gain for them. So for some, it's going to be that my patients do better. Great. For some, it's going to be, I have less administrative duties, right? And so it depends. You have to understand what is a win for the person that's sitting in front of you. And so I think that digging deeper and asking why. So I remember at one point, no, we're not going to be able to start this medication in hospital. Why not? If you don't ask why not, you don't understand. The why not was, well, because when a patient presents to the ER, somebody has to stop the medication they're currently on so that I can start this one. Okay, so why doesn't anybody stop it at the ER? Because it says so in the guidelines. Okay, let's go back to the guidelines. Is this evidence-based? Not really. It's not evidence-based that this patient needs to stay on this therapy, but it is evidence-based that if you discontinue a treatment during a hospital stay, you're less likely to restart it outside of the hospital. But if you're going to switch it for another medication that you start in hospital, you have a good chance of that patient staying on that treatment out of the hospital. And so it's really about digging deep. What are the true objections? What are they? You know, one physician actually told me, I don't have a fellow. And I said, in my clinic, okay, what does you not having a fellow have to do with? Well, I've been used to doing this for the last 20 years. Now you're going to ask me to change. I don't even have a fellow to support me. So really, the data by itself, it's tremendously important, but it's not all of it. And it's how we present the data as well, right? Storytelling, and being able to position the data in what's in it for me if I adopt this.
Yeah. Yeah. I love what you're saying. I agree 100%. I think that the key takeaway here is that just knowing science falls short, because when you have to deal with healthcare professionals who are human beings in the first place, you need to know, how to really get to know the person on the other side. I don't think that pharma companies have the luxury of taking that long. So how
No.
can we accelerate that capability building so far?
So I think that it's upskilling again, right? Like investing in the medical affairs team, having workshops around storytelling, having workshops around how to respectfully challenge, right? And how to really come to that, like I said, the win-win-win, the win for the patient, the win for the physician, the win for the organization. That's what you really, we should strive for. And behavioral science, right? That should be part of our upskilling for all of us. Because it's not, unfortunately, it's not a mandatory course in university. It should be.
I think it should be mandatory for every human being. How could you improve or ensure that teams receive the upskilling and support they need? So, it makes so we can really reflect that strategic importance. Yeah.
So I think there's two ways. It needs to come in the onboarding, right? Or even before that, we were talking about interviewing candidates. So the organization has to hire, people with the right mindset, with a growth mindset, are self-aware enough to know where their gaps are, to ask for help, to take, their development in their own hands. But then once you have them on board, the onboarding process is incredibly important. Half the time it's like, oh, I have somebody coming on board, but I'm so busy. Let's just give them stuff to read. And then, well, no, that's not how you should do it. I think being able to shadow someone, the buddy system, whatever you want to call it, that's incredibly important. Let them learn from peers that are more experienced. And then, just like in the Medical 360 program that you shared with me, Kata, the upskilling in there, like I can put my hand up on 4 or 5 things that I need. But that's not something that yet typically is, available in medical affairs, at least.
If medical affairs is that strategic, how come there's no a solid standardized approach to upskilling? That's kind of like, my challenge to the pharma world. How come it's not happening? It's kind of like not walking the talk when everybody it's speaking broadly that medical affairs are becoming more and more important, and that will become even more important as the healthcare system continues to transform.
It's a very good question. I think there is a process in place, but it definitely isn't utilized as much as it should be, and that's called a development plan. So you come to your year-end performance review, and we go over a development plan. But how seriously do we take that development plan? Do we really, break it up into milestones, into what I need to achieve in the next month, and then in 3 months, and then in 6 months? And it's often, unfortunately, something that falls at the wayside with the urgency of the business at hand today, although it should be foundational.
Yeah. Ahead of developments like AI and digital health to the work that you do in medical affairs, how critical it is?
Actually, it is very critical. It's been some time now that AI has been used in clinical trials, in medical research, to identify patients for diagnostic purposes. But more and more, I don't know if you know this, Kata, but there are more phones than there are people in the world. There are more smartphones than there are people. Therefore, AI data, we all have an abundance of it. And so now it's about, using or utilizing those tools in clinical practice to take some of the load off the overworked HCPs, nurses, administrators, etc., and to make even our own interactions with them more efficient, right? Look at how AI has revolutionized diabetes care. Nobody pricks themselves every day now to check their blood glucose. Everybody has this, monitor that is connected to your phone, and any second of the day where your blood glucose is at. So I think this is something that, we're talking about wearable technologies. We all have a phone and a watch, but tell us how. I'm not wearing mine today because I knew I wasn't going to achieve my 10,000 steps, and so I was going to feel bad. What I mean, we can be held accountable through these gadgets that we all have. And so why not? Why can we not monitor our heart rate, our blood pressure, our weight? Anything that there is, I think it's really, it's the only way, as I said, in the cost constrained environment that we are in now, and I think it's going to get worse in the next decade, that we are going to be able to stay ahead of the game. Not just, I think, for payers and decision makers, data-driven decisions are important, but even post-decision that were made. Now, decisions are not made that, we're going to reimburse this innovation forever. No, some can be time-limited recommendations. Some are outcomes-based. What's the easiest way to capture outcomes without rolling out a phase 4 clinical trial? It
Yes.
is through AI. Absolutely. So AI is a great tool, number one, to identify populations like you just mentioned, but it's also a great tool for predictive. Like you can then, based on some of that subjects, you can predict whether this therapy will or won't be effective in those
Yeah.
patients. And then that also drives decision making because then, you know, a payer can say, we will only reimburse this treatment for this amount of time in this subtype of patients because we have confidence that they will benefit. And so at the same time, AI can also be used to delist other agents that maybe are no longer best in class or, you know, are no longer the best, represent the best outcomes for patients. So really, I do think AI has a huge role. I have to say, you know, it is one of the areas where I myself have gaps and I need to become more educated on.
I have two more questions for you. So let's play. If you had a magic wand,
Mhm.
what one skill would you want every member of medical affairs teams to master immediately, and why?
I would say impactful engagement.
Tell me more about that. What do you mean by
So
that?
an engagement is an engagement. Right now, you and I are engaging in a conversation. Is the conversation that we are having right now, is that going to have a positive impact on you? Is it going to have a positive impact on me? So I think it's that piece following the engagement. So there's always an intent for the engagement, but what is the outcome of the engagement? And how do you define an impactful engagement? And I know it's very difficult to ask those kinds of questions, but I have no qualms in asking you, Kata, did you find this useful? Did you find this
Absolutely, I
conversation
do.
useful? Did you
Yeah.
learn anything new? Did I take something away from it? Which of course I did. And so I think it's that it comes with self-awareness. It's again behavioral, you know, science. It's really understanding what's an impactful engagement. And if everybody could do that, well,
And I love that you need to be very courageous to be vulnerable, to say, well,
absolutely,
did I bring any value? And
exactly.
then be able to listen what happened afterwards. That
I
I
think it would
love
be
that
even
suggestion.
more It would be even more sad to not realize that you haven't brought value and to not know how to course correct for the next engagement. That is such a missed opportunity.
Yeah, I agree. I love that. Thank you. Well, before we wrap up, we're going to have another guest that actually I'm going to be interviewing next week. She's from Europe, but then I'd like you to leave a question related to this very discussion that we're having.
You know what I would ask is if you were to ask your country general manager or your marketing director or your regulatory president, if you will, if you were to ask different members of your matrix organization, what would they say medical affairs role is? Because I do believe that there needs to be mutual understanding, and I'm not sure we're there yet.
Thank you for tuning in to SkillUp Lab. We hope you found today's insights valuable. Stay curious, keep learning, and join us next time as we continue to explore the skills you need to thrive in your career. Until then, keep upskilling.